Goats and Guns podcast for Tuesday, June 16th, 2020. My name is Tom Luongo, and we have a lot to talk about. This is episode 39, and the battle lines in the Civil War in the U.S. continue to deepen. Between the formation of the CHAZ, nay CHOP, in downtown Seattle, to the tearing down of the statues of Thomas Jefferson, the hard left have turned a corner, which ensures there will be no reconciliation of our political differences come the election in November. But before we get to that, I want to remind you that you can follow my work over at my blog at tomluongo.me. You can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728. Hey, I finally passed 5,000 followers on Twitter. I'm sure Jack Dorsey is horrified. Live streams, they happen every Monday night at 8 p.m. and every Friday night at 8:30 p.m. EST on YouTube. Warning, I'm a bad boy. I've got a potty mouth, and I use those words in sentences. You can also support the podcast by downloading and installing the Brave browser. Now, Brave protects your online privacy by blocking all those pesky data snoopers, the ads, the tracking cookies, which feed the growing surveillance state. Moreover, you can earn crypto tokens called BAT for opting into Brave's ad network and use them to tip your favorite content creators who, like me, are verified publishers on the network. Be it a favorite website, YouTube, Twitch, or SoundCloud channel, click the Brave logo icon to the right of the search bar to tip your earnings and support directly the content that you love. Lastly, you can join more than 400 people who support me directly on Patreon at patreon.com/goldgoatsandguns, where you can sign up for the twice-weekly market reports covering current events and the technical states of important markets as well. You can sign up for the Gold, Goats, and Guns monthly newsletter, which ties up all the geopolitical, cultural, and economic trends into a coherent portfolio strategy designed to help you make sense of a world going mad. All right, let's get talking about what's going on with the Civil War. And I talked about this last week, and I'm going to talk about it again this week. I truly do believe that we have reached a kind of bifurcation point in the United States. You could say this, I've felt this for years, but I really do believe that this summer is becoming kind of the dividing line in American history. And it has as much to do with the craziness after being locked up for 3 months in COVID-19 to the burgeoning financial crisis, the massive unemployment, all the rest of it, the unfairness of the way the bailouts have been dispersed to date, and all the rest of it. But this weekend, I spent a few days away from home. I got out of the house for the first time in a long time. And on best of days, I'm barely fit for human consumption. So I was allowed out of the house to go visit a friend for a couple of days. And I went down to visit in Broward County, so Fort Lauderdale, Boca Raton, that area of the world. Deepest of deep blue, Florida, supposedly. But I went down here not just to hang out with my friend for a couple of days, but also to go and be a part of the Trump Flotilla, which I got on. My friend has a friend who's got a boat, and he's a Trump supporter, and my friend's relatively speaking, is a Trump supporter, and we all kind of feel the same way about Trump, which is that he's a bit of a putz, and he's a bit of a doofus, but at the end of the day, he's the best option we have. And electing him drives the other side crazy, and that's good enough for me. I mean, I'm at that point where if politics is going to suck, at least it should be entertaining. So this is the way I think about these things. But at the end of the day, I also think that Trump still has a lot of use. I've spoken about this in the past. This is nothing new. So I think he still has a lot of potential in a second term to do a lot of really great things if he gets a second term. So sadly, for all of his faults, I still kind of am on Team Trump. And being a part of the Trump Flotilla the other day was a lot of fun. It was interesting. So got up early, had breakfast, did some work, got out the door, over to the friend's house, into the boat. I hadn't been on a boat in, 15 years. I was more worried about throwing up and not having any sea legs, even though we were on the intercoastal waterway and there was no waves, than I was anything else, to be honest with you. But yeah, I'm a horrible landlubber. I did not get sick, for the record. And so everybody's flying the Trump colors. We're getting ourselves up the intercoastal to meet up with the flotilla that's coming up from the south. And I see re-elect Trump 2020, no more bullshit. Re-elect Trump 2020 is my favorite, is fuck your feelings, which I just thought was hilarious. I only saw a few of those, to be honest with you. I saw as many of those, honestly, as I saw Joe Biden flags in the bluest of blue counties in Florida, supposedly. But it was interesting, but I had no idea how interesting. And at least I had to be 1,000 boats. I mean, I saw so many. And we were in the middle of it. And after the thing went up to Boca Lake, which is this area on the intercoastal, which is very close to being like a couple of inlets into it. But, for the most part, it's kind of a lake near Boca Raton. And that's where it ended. And then everybody would park their boats there. And then all spent the afternoon getting drunk and having a great time and yada, yada. We didn't stay. We drove up there and then did a lap around Boca Lake and then left and went home. And as we were leaving, there were still boats coming in and boats coming in. I mean, it was crazy. So, and everything from, small little dinghies to multi-story yachts that were beyond my frame of comprehension to understand how much money they were worth, right? And I saw very little support for Democrats in this area of Florida. There's a lot of money here. And I can tell you that when I'm looking around Broward County and I'm thinking the Trump Flotilla, that's like Trump's Navy. If he gets reelected in November and loses the Senate, which is a scenario that Mike Cernovich is putting out there, maybe it's possible. I don't know. Let's run with that for a minute. I can easily see Trump as, get impeached because of a treacherous Senate, and then him winding up having to be president in exile down here in Mar-a-Lago and, flex it happening, and we just secede from a union. I really do believe we're getting to that point. And I'm going to explain to you for the rest of today's podcast as to why I think that is. Okay. This is real. Just think in terms of President Trump in exile, governing from Mar-a-Lago, right? It's like, I can just see it, to be honest with you. And from the money that I saw on display, because it's like $500 million in deployed capital. I mean, we did some quick back of the envelope calculations, about how much those boats were worth and on average, and the number multiplied by the number of boats and the amount of people and the amount of gasoline and sunscreen and beer and vodka. And there's a lot of money out there. I mean, crazy. This was not cheap. People decided it was surreal enough and cool enough for them to do it and be a part of it. So, it cost me a few $100 to drive down for the weekend, yada, yada, yada. Got to figure that's all part of it as well, right? All right. But it was surreal in only a South Florida kind of way. I know they did one up in Michigan, but I mean, seriously, the size of the yachts that I saw, off the charts. I don't think we had that going on in Michigan. Not to take anything away from the people in Michigan. Apparently a 2-mile Trump Flotilla in Michigan. Great, cool, funny. But it's a version of reality in the U.S. that you won't see on Twitter. Twitter's not real life, by the way. I just want to let everybody know that Twitter's not real life. Okay. What was real life was these people. And it was weird and it was surreal and it was odd, but I got a firsthand look at it. I'm not a journalist, but for a day I was. You know what I mean? I'm mostly an opinion writer and a shit stirrer. Yesterday I was a journalist. I took video of this thing. It was weird. It was cool. Now, on the other side of it, I'm no journalist, because if I was a real journalist, I'd have already been to Seattle and back to check out the CHAZ, nay, the CHOP, because yesterday, Monday, the 15th, they had to redeclare themselves as not an autonomous zone, which we're going to get into the reason why in a minute. But to catch you up to speed, the CHAZ is an autonomous area within the city of Seattle, a 6-block zone, ceded to them by the mayor, shitlib extraordinaire, Jenny Durkan, who told the police to vacate these precinct and turn the area over to these people, to the protesters. And this was supposed to be a community-driven thing, and it was supposed to bring people together, just like the Trump Flotilla actually did. But I don't know. Not fully from what I'm seeing. Apparently, they invited all the homeless people in to feed them, and the homeless people took all their food and left. And then they were crying for vegan pizzas over the internet. And they even had a local warlord show up. Raz Simone, the rapper, we've all heard about this guy, comes in with an AK-47 and starts declaring himself in charge, because someone has to actually rise to the top of the competence hierarchy. Somebody has to do some work. They've erected barriers, walls, checkpoints. I'm sure they'll start passing out passports soon or whatever. I don't know. We'll see. They began a governing council in the whole 9 yards. So let's not kid ourselves. They had declared themselves for 6 days an autonomous zone. But then reality started to strike them. Because being an autonomous zone meant that there's no chance for them to channel tax money from the local and state governments to support them. That means that as an autonomous zone, they have no claim on the water running through the pipes, or the gas running through the lines, or the electricity, or any of it. That the city would be well within its rights to shut off all services to these people. And I can tell you that if they tried this in Lake City, Clay Electric would have turned off the power, because the city of Lake City, no matter what the Lake City City Council would have demanded, they don't run an electric company. They don't run a municipal electric company, right? It's run by a Clay Electric cooperative. We own the electrical company here in North Florida. Backwards redneck North Florida has more of a narco-syndicalist co-op for electricity generation than the actual commies in Seattle do, taking over the city. But I digress. So they would be well within their rights to shut off all city services to these people. Not that the mayor wanted to do this, not that the governor wanted to do this. They're, of course, playing cheap, petty politics, trying to goad Donald Trump into creating a race war by invading the CHAZ and breaking it up. CHOP, sorry. So we had the autonomous zone, the CHAZ, we had the AZ become an OP. Well, like I said, this is pretty obvious. From the beginning, this was an OP that's being subsidized by the governor and by the mayor and by the DNC and by everybody else. The whole point of this is to be a distraction, to be an insane and lunatic nightmare fringe thing, to get everybody focused on, to get Tucker Carlson to go on an eloquent and completely on-point rant about every night. Right. But it's an op. It's very obviously an op. And the reason we know it's an op is because they had to change the name to CHOP, because now that it's an organized protest and not an autonomous zone, OP, organized protest, AZ, autonomous zone, now they can funnel tax money to them. Now they can keep the lights on. Now they can keep the water running. Now they can do all those things. That's why they did it. That's why they changed it. But these people declared independence. And if that independence is stuck, no tax money gets to flow in. Services can be cut off. Eventually the CHAZ doesn't produce anything other than human waste, right? And what do they produce in the CHAZ? Bad poetry, farts, full porta potties, broken windows, graffiti, bad argumentation, warmed over Marxism, and struggling arugula. Okay, cool. I'm with the Trump people. Like, they were passing out beers. But that's why the name changed. What are they producing? And how are they going to produce? And how are they going to sustain themselves? These people are all about sustainability. The symbol of unsustainability, a $5 million 3-story yacht. Sustainability, the arugula garden, struggling to survive. What did socialists used to use before candles? Light bulbs, right? So this is where we are. This is what is going on here. And while I have a soft spot for these guys, I'd like to see them succeed just to prove to everybody that we don't need a nasty, violent, retributive police state to maintain order. But these guys aren't going to be the ones to do it, right? Because they didn't go into this with any forethought. Most of them showed up with $500 in their pocket, a couple of days worth of freaking food, and a tent, and maybe some candles and some weed. And what else did they really come up with? They think that was going to sustain them forever and a day. Services aren't coming in. Pizzas are $10 a piece. I mean, do the math. Okay, so you can live there for, a month, 6 weeks. Think that's enough to change the entire power structure of the United States through a 50-day sit-in? Not well thought out. Because they just don't understand how capital is produced, how it's maintained, how wealth is produced, how wealth is maintained, and how all these services and all this property that they've forcibly taken over through theft and redistribution. They have no idea how it came about. They have no skin in the game of how it was produced. They don't, no matter what they think, no matter what they say, no matter how little or much tax money they've paid in their lives. They're standing on the shoulders of giants. We all are. And yes, sometimes those giants weren't great people. And sometimes even the best of those giants had failings, which is why they're toppling statues to Thomas Jefferson in Portland, because they can't reconcile the idea that people who came before them weren't virtuous all the time, because they have no capacity for forgiveness. They have no capacity and see the possibility for redemption, and therefore. So I see a lot of virtue signaling on Twitter about how great the CHOP is. And it's pretty obvious that what they're trying to do now is drum up tourism bucks to go in there and for everybody to kind of look at it as, kind of this weird oddity behind the facade of what is ultimately going to wind up being very quickly kind of a Lord of the Flies situation, even though I don't even buy that Lord of the Flies would ever be a Lord of the Flies. There's something, when you subsidize the kind of behavior that we've already seen, which is what Mayor Durkan and Governor Inslee are doing, you're going to get more of it because it's an economic verity. You subsidize something, you get more of it. But I can easily see this at the end of the day maybe being some kind of tourism, attraction. You get the walls up, so kind of like, all these, hey, honey, let's go to the CHU, the zoo, and let's go look at the Q communists playing revolutionaries. Yay! And, you buy a $6 hot dog and, $3 bottle of water, and, they can sustain themselves a little bit maybe. And then they'll have taxes distributed amongst people and all the rest of it. And they'll start to look kind of like everything else that we've ever produced. Okay. Well, that's fine. The CHOP really only survives on the backs of the people who created wealth before them and who are willing to sustain them because they're entertaining. Unless they can start to really start to think about how they can very quickly produce something of value. And they're going to have a couple of months to figure this out. And if they don't, if it lasts that long, and if they don't, it'll all just collapse. All right. But that being said, maybe I'm being a little harsh. Maybe that's not being unfair. Because there's another way to look at both of these events. And that is that they're both orgies of human frustration. They're all explosions of pent-up human frustration and human anger at the unfairness and the craziness of our system. Both of these things are surreal, right? They don't make any sense whatsoever, kind of, when you really stop to think about it. Donald Trump is president. Donald Trump is president. And there were people out in yachts worth billions of dollars with flags all over those yachts trumpeting Trump. It's still surreal to me. Just as we have an autonomous zone within the city of Seattle. But they're both protests against the looting that occurs systemically within our society. What they are two different expressions of the frustration with that looting. The CHOP, those people are all about taking the property back that they feel was gained through exploitation, profit, and the backs of all the exploited workers and former slaves and all the rest of it, and that all of the claims to previous property are ill-gotten. I refer them, by the way, to Walter Block's great discussions on Mises.org about reparations and how much people would actually, the descendants of slaves would actually be worth in reparations if we accepted reparations today. Walter Block's got hours of discussion on this, and I heartily recommend all members of the CHOP who are listening to my voice to go listen to them, to get an idea of just how much money we're talking about here. And is it even worth it to redistribute that money? Oh, by the way, they were forcing redistribution of wealth from white people within the CHOP to black people. And because if you didn't do so, then you weren't sufficiently committed to the cause. By the way, just to remind everybody that they are, in fact, communists. On the other side of the coin is the Trump Flotilla. And they see themselves as defending civilization against the orcs that are currently on display in the CHOP, and in the Senate, and in the House, and in our state houses, and in our supervisors of elections, and in our attorneys general, and. They do see themselves as this. And both criticisms have kernels of truth to them. There's a vulgar amount of wealth on display during the Trump Flotilla. There's no way to argue that. It's impressive. It is what it is. I don't begrudge these people for the most part. I'm going to assume that they're not the worst of the worst oligarchs who literally make money off of the backs of the Federal Reserve directly, right? They're not the Clintons, and they're not the Jamie Dimon and the rest of them. They're not those people. They may be downstream from them, maybe 2 or 3 degrees of separation from those people who, just grew up within the system, kind of like Trump, who grew up within the system, were fabulously successful within the system. And at a certain level, they gamed the system and they played it well, and they used their advantages, either of birth or standing or status or sex or race or creed or whatever, to their advantage. And they got it done. Fine. Not crazy about that, but there's no way to pay reparations for that. There's just a way to we should just be looking at how to get rid of that and move forward. Some of that wealth was earned through the being, close to the magic money tree and the privilege afforded to white people, which is real. I acknowledge the fact that being a white guy gives me certain advantages in this life over being a black guy. No argument. Now, we know that black men are harassed more than white men are. We know all this. No one's arguing this. This isn't one screen, 2 movies kind of thing. We know that this is real. But how real? And am I willing to have that conversation with black people? Absolutely. Am I willing to listen to their pain? Absolutely. Am I willing to figure out ways that I can assist them to overcome that? Absolutely. Am I willing to use that as an excuse for why they get to come into my house and take my stuff? Break my windows? And terrorize my children? No. I'm willing to listen to that, and they have to listen to my criticisms about what the actual root systemic causes are. And then let's move forward. And then let's really change the society for the better. And that's the problem here. The CHOP protests, personally, I think comes from these are people who have no purpose with their life. They have no meaning. Many of them are childless millennials who have no meaning, no purpose. They know they're screwed. They know they're not going to get the American dream of, a house and wife and 1.5 cars and 2.3 kids in suburbia. They know they're not going to get that life without being into that up to their eyeballs. But again, the same thing. A lot of the upper middle class in the Trump Flotilla, and some of those people were not upper middle class. Some of those people just happen to have lived in Broward for so long that their house is now worth $500,000 when they bought it for $80,000 40 years ago, and they have a small boat that they bought for $20,000 that many years ago, and they were able to stick a flag on it, and they're still driving that same boat today. Some of those people aren't wealthy, but they're living hand to mouth. And sure, they could sell their house today on the Intercoastal that's worth $500 or $600 and go move to Cedar Key and buy a bigger place for $125. Sure, $150. Sure. But why should they? They've lived in Broward their whole life. Why should they do that? And they get it. Everybody gets what's going on here. Everybody's got an axe to grind. Everybody's been impoverished by the system. But all of that doesn't give you the fundamental difference between these two groups of people is that one complains about it, but still bears the burden and gets up every day and does the job and does what they need to do to survive, and complains about it only through the peaceful application of voting and trying to wrest control of the government. Not that the government ultimately isn't an organization of violence, but in their minds, this is the way they're doing it. These are the rules that they were given, and they're trying to play within those rules, make a better world for themselves. That's what this represents. It's what the Trump Flotilla represented. We want change to the system, and we're willing to invest it in this doofus to get it done. That's how desperate we are. I mean, at a certain level, everybody's desperate here. But this does not give you carte blanche and an excuse to then turn your anger into envy and just want to tear everything down. When I look at the CHAZ, millennials, Antifa, the rest, when I look at these people, all I see is Fight Club. You guys remember the scene in Fight Club that I'm talking about, I'm about to invoke, right? They're in Fight Club, and the narrator, Ed Norton, gets in the ring with Angel, played by the very good-looking Jared Leto, and proceeds to pummel him into unrecognizability. At which point, after he's done, in his orgy of violence, he sits back, and Tyler Durden stands on his shoulder, Angel on his shoulder, and asks, "What the fuck was that all about?" And he says, "I just wanted to destroy something beautiful." They've just destroyed downtown Seattle. It's horrific. Turned something beautiful into something ugly. They went bald for BLM because they wanted to turn themselves ugly. White women hate themselves so much they want to turn themselves ugly, even though that was a poll jest, and I know this. Even though that was a poll troll, I get it. I know. It doesn't matter. Both of these are kind of childish tantrums, and yet they're not. They're very sophisticated protests. But the fundamental difference is that one has devastating real-world consequences on real people. There's been theft, there's been violence, there's been vandalism. Not just on other people, but now they're turning on themselves. And the other one showed up, was peaceful, wasted a few thousand gallons of gasoline, drank a few hundred gallons of beer, and wasted some sunscreen that they would have done, and they would have done all this in their backyard anyway. It's a Sunday in South Florida. And the only difference was they put their Trump flags on their boats and all got together and did it at the same time in an organized manner. When it was all over, they all went home, they all sobered up, and they all went to work the next morning to make the wealth to sustain the lifestyle so they can go out and do it again. They're both important. The flotilla brought a lot of people together. It was peaceful, if a little obnoxious. And only the thinnest of thin-skinned jackass commie would be upset by it. And anybody who is upset or triggered by the Trump Flotilla needs therapy. Because you know you're going to lose in November. And that's why you're angry about it. You know you're wrong. And you've lost all sense of irony. You've lost all sense of proportion and everything else. And you refuse to understand what's actually driving these people. At the same time, the chop is only going to continue for as long as the people of Seattle are willing to put up with it, because they can break that thing up in 20 minutes if they wanted to. But they don't want to, the civilian leadership in Seattle. The change there will come from the people or not at all. And maybe, just maybe, as I said earlier, they'll just turn it into the Seattle Zoo. As opposed to going to seeing animals, we'll go see animals. I'm not going. I don't like vegan pizza. But why this is so important is because these are two cultures that are irreconcilable. There's no way to get these two groups of people to talk to each other anymore. They are in their own echo chambers, one on the Intercoastal Waterway in Broward County, the other one in the 6 blocks of autonomous zone, having an organized protest in Seattle. They've got nothing to talk about. These are two people separated by a common language, in the words of George Bernard Shaw. And it's not going to change. And it's not going to get any better. Because they both use English in ways that the other doesn't understand. They're both speaking the same language, but they can't parse each other's words. And when you get to that point, and the language doesn't serve each other in the same way, when they're talking to each other, at that point, neither of them wants to be ruled by the other. Now all you can do is decide who's going to control the existing governmental apparatus. That's the definition of a civil war. And when that's done, the only other option is to submit or to leave. And I can tell you down here in Florida, what I saw from the flotilla, I saw enough Gadsden flags to tell you, along with all the fuck your feelings flags. I saw enough Gadsden flags, and I saw a couple of Confederate battle flags. They're not going to go gently into that good night. So, as I said earlier, don't be surprised that if I'm not right, that in a year, we're not looking at President in exile Trump issuing decrees from Mar-a-Lago, because the people down here love the guy. Our governor is one of his allies. And none of the people down here, including the supposedly, oh my God, bluest of blue county Democrats, want what they're seeing in Seattle. This has been the Gold, Ghosts, and Guns podcast for Tuesday, June 16th, 2020. If you like what you heard today, give a like, give a subscribe on iTunes or Podbean or Spreaker or Spotify or whatever. You can find this podcast through the RSS feed, syndicated to all those your favorite podcast platforms. And if you like it, then, subscribe, and we'll see what we come up with next week for episode 40. I'm going to cut and run. You guys be well. You take care. We'll talk soon. Keep your stick on the ice.